Welcome to the Wild Hope Rising podcast. We're your hosts, Sunny Kane and Tammy Clotton, and we're so glad you stopped by. We want to help you be wildly you, and believe it or not, you're already her. We invite you to gather around the table with us. We'll help you move through your wilderness season, no matter how you got here. So lean in, let's ignite your purpose, and discover what you're made of. Buckle up, my friend. It's time for Wild Hope. Well, ladies, welcome back to Wild Hope Rising. We are so glad to be with you today. It is a fun episode because Tammy and we're having a hope huddle today. And I don't know about you, Tammy, but I am super excited about our guest today.
Me too. I was just telling her, I'm so excited to be face to face with her. We can see her even though you can't. And it's just a joy to see her smiling face. So that she can talk too, right? Because it's this awkward, like I'm sitting here like a fly on the wall, and Tammy's having fly issues as we talk. There is a fly that will not quit hounding her while we're getting ready to record here. But ladies, first of all, if this is your first time listening, thank you for being here. In our community, we have such a heart to help women who are in wilderness seasons, knowing that ultimately the wilderness is kind of life. Like we walk through seasons like these all of the time. And sometimes we're afraid to name these seasons because we feel like we're the only one. And here in our community, we speak to wilderness women. And when I say wilderness, we're talking these kind of seasons that you find yourself in that maybe you feel held back or fenced in. You might feel limited in some way. They might be triggered by something like grief or a life transition or a difficulty or an internal or external resistance that you might be carrying. But nonetheless, they can leave us feeling stuck and disillusioned and sometimes really disconnected from ourselves and others. So these are the seasons that we connect with women in. And as a part of this, we like to help people in those wilderness seasons experience wild hope rising in the midst of them, knowing that sometimes the invitation is actually to the wilderness. It's not about trying to help you get out of the wilderness. The wilderness does wonders. And so that is who we are, Wild Hope Rising. And we love to just gather with women like yourself, women who are taking time out of their busy schedules to listen to us. You might be listening to us on a treadmill while you have a baby on your hip, while you are in your office. We don't know. We just know that women are crazy busy, and we are honored that you have decided to share a part of your time with us. We pray that something that is spoken in this Hope Huddle today would spark something. In fact, our prayer today was that we would be a catalyst of either healing in your life, a catalyst to transformation, a catalyst to you having a conversation with God, or maybe taking an action in your life to walk through this wilderness season. So with that, our guest today, I got to tell you, her name is Tori Hein. And I met Tori when she was in middle school. And this girl, I want you to imagine the landscape. It was filled with conversations on, every time I tell this to Tori, I say, it was a conversation-filled atmosphere talking about farts and lipstick and everything in between. And it was so random. And there was Tori.
Some things never change. Things never change.
And in that place, I met this chick who had a deep love for God, even as a young child. And what I saw in her was this wisdom that was beyond her years that she carried. And just a ferocious, part of you that was like, I care about the truth of God's word. And there I was, so young, honestly not growing up in the church, and I encountered Tori, and Tori was somebody God used at her young age to spark growth in me. And so, Tori, I am really honored. And Tammy, how do you know Tori? Like, where did you guys connect?
I met Tori when she very first moved to Nevada. And because I knew her parents, then I interacted with Tori off and on. But it wasn't until later in Tori's adult life that I actually got to know Tori. And so just as a woman, and she was married at the time and everything. So I didn't really know Tori until she was an adult.
Let me speak a little bit to that, Tammy. Do you remember when my husband first started touring and I was navigating really the doorway into what my wilderness season would be, I booked a counseling session with you. Do you remember? And it was a long one.
But not my story to share.
I won't go into it of all that I said, but you spoke a prophetic word over me that I'm now walking in the fullness of today, which is, you said, Tori, someday you're going to make a really amazing coach. And I was like, well, maybe, I don't know. But you were the one to speak into me of the truth that part of my framework and my calling was to walk with women and to mentor them. And but you were the first person to say, someday you'll make a really good coach. And I remember walking away from that conversation thinking, I might remember. It was just the one line that I remember from the entire time that we were together. But it kind of sparked a sense of hope of, oh, could God be walking me through a story that would one day not just be a story I carry, but a person I become, and then a calling that I embrace. And, here we are, goodness, 11 years later. And I have witnessed the goodness and the faithfulness of God so much, and now get to pour that out in the way that you poured it into me in that season, which was really beautiful. So, and like the last time that we were all together, we were smashing plates out in the desert.
That's true.
That's true. Fun fact is that I re-brought the smashing plate object lesson to my small group earlier this year because my small, I know, Demi's like, embrace the anger. Let's feel the emotion. And because these girls were navigating crazy grief, all of them, and didn't know what to do with it. So it didn't feel right to just have a happy little Bible study. I was like midway through the session and I was like, do you guys want to smash something? And 4 of the girls were like, absolutely. And the rest of them were like, are we allowed to? Do we have to get permission from the pastor or something? Because we're a Bible study connected to a church. And I was like, I don't think so. We could ask for forgiveness instead of permission. And one of the women was navigating a lot of just turmoil in her life, was a brand new believer, and she had never prayed out loud in front of people before. We went out to my backyard and, had written various things that were bearing a lament before God for, and she smashed it and she screamed this passionate prayer out into my backyard, valley. And all of us were like, wow, and she turned around. She's like, that's the first time I've prayed out loud. And I was like, we're here for it. I'll just never forget it. And then I had to leave for a coaching training the next day. And I text my husband because it was too late for me to find all of the broken plate pieces in my backyard and in my driveway. And I just said, hey, I'm so sorry, babe, that these girls went a little crazy because there's pieces of shattered plates all in the grass. Like if you try to mow the lawn over it, break the lawnmower. And Matt didn't even blink twice. He's just like, all right, I'll clean it tomorrow. Like he's like unbothered. He just knows this is what happens now. Oh yeah. So you smashed all of our plates, like the ones in the dining room. And I'm like, yeah, the ones that we bought like at the thrift store, the ones that weren't super nice. He's like, so all our plates are smashed and you need me to clean it up. And I'm like, absolutely, yes, because I'm going out of town. God bless my husband.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful.
So today, ladies, we have brought Tori to smash some stuff. Just kidding.
Let's get
smashed. Like, this is the best intro. Tori Hein, let's get smashed.
Let's go, guys.
This is going to be awesome. But ladies, what I also know is that we're telling you the endearing parts of who Tori is and who she has been to us. But I do want to help you get to know her a little bit with these words. So she is a down-to-earth Bible teacher, and she is a trauma-informed coach. She's also an entrepreneur whose passion for God and authenticity, it really does draw people in. And after years of supporting her husband that she has mentioned and his band, I Am They, and running her own online business, Tori hit burnout and began a powerful journey of healing that now fuels her mission, helping women and Christian leaders to experience wholeness and freedom through trauma-informed, biblically based coaching. And she now serves as a coach, a trainer, and an executive program director for Freedom Movement. And so I think it's fun for people to, even though the awkwardness of sitting in your bio, I think it really helps listeners to get a hold of who the heck is Tori Hein so that we know who we're talking to today.
Here I am, guys.
She's here for it. So we already alluded to this, but we talk about wilderness seasons here. And so I would love for you to just, have you ever been in a wilderness season of sorts? And if so, could you kind of describe it for us? Tell us what that was like.
Yeah, I think we're called as people to venture in and out of the wilderness often. And I mean, throughout the Bible, you see so many examples of desert places where you go and you meet God. The presence of God is there. You don't go into a wilderness season and live to tell the tale unless you had to intentionally find something to eat and drink. Like that's the blessing, is that you're not in the promised land, so to speak, where there's a place flowing with milk and honey. You're digging wells in the desert, desperate for a drop of water. And the beauty of what we find there is the truth of who we are and also the truth of who God is. And for me, my wilderness season began in my early 20s. I came home from college and I thought that I would re-enter back into the music ministry that my husband and I had helped start in our small town, the same town where Sunny and Tammy are from, where the ministry that I left behind before going to college kind of served as a mini revival in our valley. We saw so many people come to Jesus and a hunger and a thirst for Jesus. And there was this beauty that I felt would last forever of what we experienced in that space, especially with me and my husband. But then when I went to college and I came back with this expectation that I could re-enter back into everything that I was a part of before, God began writing a different story. And it was one where he would hem me in and redirect me in what felt like rejection for truly a redirection season. In a span of 6 months, God pressed fast forward on my life really quickly. And Sunny kind of alluded to this because wilderness seasons are often marked by big transitions and sudden changes. The 6-month fast forward process led me to move home from college, get married, find out that I was pregnant, and then found myself in Nashville with my closest friends and my husband being offered recording contracts, which was not what we were considering our future would look like. And so in a span of 6 months, I'm now pregnant at 20, and my husband has this incredible career, and there was seemingly no possibility for me to be an active part of it due to our financial restraints and our coming baby. And so in this season of excitement and, beauty of what God was unfolding for my closest friends and my husband, God invited me into the wilderness to be alone with him. And I didn't know how to navigate the disillusionment of that in the season. This ended up including a cross-country move and about an 8-year-long process of me navigating the depths of intimacy with God that felt a lot like Moses, in the fact that what was birthed in Moses as a teenager that he wanted to do in his own strength, God brings him to the wilderness so that 40 years later, thank God mine didn't last that long, at least yet, who knows? God might be like, we're going to just circle around this wilderness and go another round, but comes and finds Moses to call him right back to the places that he was passionate about 40 years prior, but with a embodied humility within him to where God could actually work through him. And so, the last couple of years has been a beautiful reentry back into the kingdom, so to speak, and out of the wilderness, to where I can offer an embodied story where the word of God has been allowed to not just be something I know in my head, but something I've lived and consumed and now outflow through my life.
Oh my goodness. I'm like, I hear so much and I can relate to so much of your story, even though my story is so much different than yours.
Mm-hmm.
But the long journey of 8 years is what I grab a hold of, is those, when you're in it for that long, it sometimes feels like it is never going to end. And yet I can stand as a witness to the fruit of that season in your life. What has happened and what has birthed through your life as a result of that. But as you were talking, I was thinking, for somebody who maybe they're listening today and the idea of God meeting them in the wilderness, maybe God has been either unsafe for them before, or maybe God has been something that they have struggled to even know if he exists. How would you speak to somebody like that that isn't quite sure about God, but may find themselves in a season like yours? What would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the first, and I know that I'm coming back to a biblical character because that's how my brain goes and how my brain works. But I was talking to a family member that just isn't sure where she stands in her understanding and love for God or belief in God. But when I told her this woman's story, there was a sense of camaraderie, or she could see herself in this character. So whether or not you believe in the Bible, this character is still a historic figure and someone that I take a lot of comfort from. But it's a story of Hagar. And Hagar is a slave woman who has been abused and used as a false fulfillment of the promise that God had given Abraham that he would have children. And Sarah, in her contempt and her jealousy and envy and desire to have this child, tries to coerce a way to figure it out on her own. And this woman, Abraham's wife, chooses to use this woman named Hagar to do it, which is just so evil in its very core. Like, the Bible is just full of really hard stories to wrap your mind around, you know? Hagar becomes pregnant by force over Abraham, and she then navigates the envy of Sarah that it actually worked. Oh my gosh, now I'm carrying the son of promise, but he's not the real promise. And so she leaves, she runs away. And where does she go? She goes to the desert. And right when she's about ready to die, God, and these things happen in the Bible where Jesus shows up as an angelic being before he ever comes in the embodied form of Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. This angel meets her in the desert with 2 questions that just prompt such beautiful connection. It's not like God comes in here and goes, get back into line and tell, where to go and wipe your tears and stop crying about it and whatever. Hagar, who doesn't really know where she stands, she's a foreigner who's been forced to be a slave, who's now abused, meets this God of love that draws near to her story with 2 questions. Hagar, where have you come from? And where are you going? And here's what you need to know about the presence of God if he meets you in the wilderness and you don't already have a relationship with him, is that his primary goal isn't to use you or convince you of something or to change you. His first and foremost goal is to connect with you and love you. And it always has been and it always will be that first and foremost goal. And so with these 2 questions, and the thing is, we know that scripture has a lot of empty spaces. There must have been a longer conversation than what's written in the Genesis account. She tells him her story. And Hagar is met with the love of God. She's the first one who ever gives God a name. So this woman that's in exile and abused and disillusioned and on the verge of death, has this encounter with God. And then she goes, "You are the God who sees me." And God gives her a promise that she then takes back to her place of bondage. Like, she goes back to her abuser because she goes back knowing, I go back with something more than what my circumstances secure for me. I go back with a promise from a God who met me and loves me and sees me in my desperation. God gives her a drink of water, and he tells her that her son, Ishmael, would inherit a blessing. And you know what's so incredible is that, I don't know, Tammy and Sunny, are you Jewish? Do you come from a Jewish heritage? What's so incredible is that the promise of God for us as believers who believe in Jesus and believe this story is we are grafted into the family of God because of the promise that God gave to this abused woman in the wilderness. Because we fall in the lineage of not the pure Jewish line. We're grafted in as Gentiles into the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that we all get to be a part of this love story with Jesus. And so God meeting this random woman in the desert in the midst of her despair opened up a promise not just for her, but one that the entire world now gets to dwell in the fullness and the fruitfulness of.
That's beautiful.
I don't know if that's the answer you were asking for, but that's the answer that came to mind.
Tori, how do you interact with this story on a personal level? What did it mean for you in your wilderness to see this with Hagar? And how did God speak to you through her story?
Well, I wanted to answer the second question before I answered the first question. Where am I going? I don't want to talk about where I've been. I want to know where I'm going. And I honestly, that was my biggest resistance for many of those years of wilderness seasons, because in a desperate attempt to avoid the grief that was just right on the verge of swallowing me alive in this season of abandonment and rejection and these shattered expectations for what I thought my life would look like, and then an exile season away from everything that I knew in my hometown and my family, I wanted to do more in order to escape the felt sense of turmoil and grief that was right below the surface of my life. It didn't work out great. Well, it did. Because God is gracious, and he still breathes on the things that we attempt to grow, even with broken motivations. He brought good friends. He brought beautiful provision. He brought redirection. He brought maturity. But I wanted to answer the second question first until 2020 hit, and my 7 years prior of relentlessly pursuing the where am I going and not really communing at the depth with God around that question, but more so putting Jesus stamps onto what I perceived were good things that I could do in Jesus' name. He paused me, as he did the entire world that year, and asked me to take a deeper look at the first question. Where have you come from? Because what informs our reactions in our life, my impulsivity to do more for God, to try harder and to fill my schedule in order to escape the sense of grief, had not been explored with much curiosity at all. What was the story that shaped this impulsive response that I was on a cycle through for the last 7 years prior to that? I didn't start asking that story with God until that year, which was really the invitation to grieve, the story that had formed me in order to move forward in wholeness and not in desperation that some sort of external pursuit would satisfy an internal need of my heart.
I remember being with you on the weekend that the pause was invited. And the picture I have, if permission to go there.
Go for it. Yeah.
It's of a Tori. We were at this, Freedom Academy, and Tori has come while she's on a 75-day hard. And when Tori is committed to something, if you know her, I mean, she is all in. And so we're going to this event during the day that is definitely tapping heartstrings. Like, it's designed to do that. It's designed for this invitation into, these kind of questions. And we get home, but Tori needs to work out because she's got her 75-day hard commitment. So while we're on the couch trying to talk through the day of what had happened in our hearts, Tori is doing squats in front of us while we're having deep conversation, right? So there we are. We're like, oh my gosh, my heart was wrenched today. And Tori's like doing her squats. Like, I'm still doing the thing. But I remember there was a moment where I think it was the next night, and you sat on the couch and wept and said, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, you were do you remember that? And all of a sudden, it was, these crazy squats are not serving me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the veil was torn for me that weekend, and I was not well. And realizing, like, what? First of all, just how annoying, wish that anybody would have been like, could you stop? We're all trying to have a really nice, heartfelt conversation over here, and we're watching you do your burpees and your squats over there like an impressive. The thing is that need to do impressive things to make myself look strong, to protect myself from the vulnerability and the grief that I didn't want to feel, kept me so far from people. It kept me from the couch. It kept me from my tears. It kept me from honesty. And it felt a whole lot safer. It's what I had done for those 7 years prior to, sink or swim, But that weekend gave language to an inner reality of my heart where I was like, oh, wait, could my incessant need to perform and do things perfectly be a trauma response? Do I have trauma in my story? Like, I wouldn't have called it trauma. I thought grief was just like for the ladies that had lost husbands, or, the random grief group in the basement of the church that like nobody wants to go and hang out with. Or I'm like, I don't need that. I need a 75 hard exercise challenge, because that'll solve everything with a rock solid set of abs, I 100% remember that. And it was the invasion truly that weekend for me.
And what's so funny about you said, why I wish somebody would have said, stop doing the squats. The problem is that was at the beginning of my breakdown, of my really acknowledgement of what was going on. And so what I could see in my unhealth was I was the girl who knew I belonged in the basement in the grief stuff. I knew I belonged there because of all the big T trauma in my life. But I looked at somebody like you and I longed for, if I could only be the girl doing squats, like, why am I not disciplined enough? So it was back then, I just remember that trigger to, at that point, I wish I could be more like Tori. Like, all I do is sit in the basement and grieve, right? So, and this is what happens to us. We compare and we do all these things that keep us. So there I was on the couch, but I was still engaging in a behavior that kept me from actually engaging what needed to be engaged in my life. So we were doing the same things. It just looked different.
Yeah. I mean, that's what kept my incessant cycle of performance going, was that's what I would receive is, I wish I was more like you.
Yeah.
I wish I was as strong as you. I wish I could pull myself up from my bootstraps like you. And it made me believe, and this was informed really by the years prior to that in the spiritual worlds that we grew up in and in the church culture that we grew up in, was reinforced to be what faithfulness and goodness and a life lived for the glory of God looked like. Be strong, be happy, suck it up, forget the past, and move forward. And so we were both deceived.
Yeah.
And also simultaneously being invited into truth that took us two different directions. You know, for me, it was, you got to get down into the basement. You belong there too, Tori. Me? No. You know?
Yeah.
I know. Oh my goodness. And we're in the middle right now, Tori. We just started it last week of a Rise from Ashes series. And last week, we've been kind of using Nehemiah as a backdrop for this, of this process. And last week, what we left women with, and I told Tammy when we left them, I'm the girl who likes to bring the resolve. Like, I want to bring the resolve. And we left women in the middle of a step of, would you be willing to possibly survey the territory in your life of the broke down walls? Survey the territory of what you lost. Survey that territory, look at it. And now we have you coming in, and that's really why we thought, man, Tori, we have seen you gain street cred in not just wilderness seasons, right? Street cred, like God has used your life. And we have seen you from afar, and, just in even the times that we have connected, I would say in this willingness to engage, survey the territory of the places of a harm in our stories, but also how to grieve our stories and how to receive love from God. And so that we would love to hear you talk about grief, about what this has looked like for you to engage this grief and how you've received God's love in that.
Mm. Well, you got 4 more hours. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. No.
Oh, yeah. The invitation to grieve is the invitation to name what has been lost that was very valuable. We have an enemy whose sole goal in our life and in the world at large is to steal, kill, and destroy the goodness that we embody as image bearers of God. That was his goal in the garden, and it's his goal when I'm doing burpees when you guys are crying on the couch. Is to manipulate and disorder and distract us, and ultimately with the end goal of killing us and destroying us from the pathway back to God. So if you are to be courageous enough to take a lay of the land and to turn toward the rubble and to really to stop avoiding it, moving away from it, but to piece by piece begin to evaluate which pieces do I pick up first. It will not feel great. It's costly. And here's the thing about even in grief is what metabolizes the trauma in our story to be places where we're no longer stuck, but places where we're invited. If we are to name the one piece of the puzzle that helps your brain heal, that helps your body heal, that invites deeper honesty and connection with yourself, God, and others, this is what we teach through our freedom movement trainings, is grief is actually the doorway and the bridge that moves you from behavior modification into heart transformation. And so, I look at the Rubble and go, for the years before this, I look at the Rubble and go, well, here's a quick survey. You know what I need? Another 75-day hard challenge, another entrepreneurial goal checklist. Because I can control that and I can measure it and I'll be praised for it. But what I really needed was to take the armor off and invite the threat of being weak, the threat of being needy, the threat of being sad. From my perspective, I had no trauma in my story. This is what I believed, especially before this weekend, Sunny, that you're alluding to. Whereas for you, you had a much different childhood than mine and much different experience where you could clearly see it. And mine were more lowercase t traumatic moments that compounded over time that were very subtle and then masked with a message of like, God is good all the time and all the time God is good, where you're just like, oh, is he? Because what I'm seeing around the church and in families' lives or whatever is there's a lack of goodness. Actually, the enemy is like destroying a lot of goodness, but you're calling it good and I don't understand. I was bound to a perception of my life that relentlessly white-knuckled the idea that it was great and good. And if we were to tell any other story other than that, we would be disobedient to God and dishonoring to people. But grief invites us to name the truth of the story, to name the sorrow that's been experienced, to name the brokenness where the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy. And because nobody is exempt from sin, this is a universal reality post-Eden, nobody is exempt of trauma. And a trauma is not defined by the circumstances that you live through. It's defined by how your body and your mind changes because of what you've been through. It's an internal change. And so people can experience a lot of crazy traumatic stuff, but if they have the invitation to grieve and to repair and to receive forgiveness and to hold on to that intimacy, trauma doesn't get embedded in the body and turned into 75-day, checklists or, the internal narrative on the couch that I need to be the girl, 75-day checklist. It doesn't become that when we have safe places to tell the truth and to cry and to repent and to lament. That's what clears the rubble and allows you to rebuild on a foundation of truth rather than a foundation where truth has been hidden and you in your own effort are just going to build that castle on the sand. Like, speaking of very frustrating, uneasy endings, like you said last week, you're like, well, have a good week, guys. I'm just going to leave you there. You're kind of embracing the way that Jesus taught. The very last words on the Sermon on the Mount, when you read it in the book of Matthew, beautiful, poetic sermon. Jesus is really only recorded full sermon, and there's plenty of other stories and stuff. But the last thing that he says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount is the picture of anybody who hears these words and does them is like a man who builds the house on the rock. And any of you, he's speaking to the audience, just imagine if a pastor did this today from stage. Any of you who hear these words and you do not do them, you are like the foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And when the waves come and when the wind crashes, his house will turn into rubble. And this will be what your life will look like if you don't heed these words. Okay, everybody, have a good night. Service is over. Church is not. God's good all the time. He's like, and done. That's the end of the sermon, is this frayed edge of what will you do? Will you build on sand or will you build on rock? And the only way that you can build on rock is if you clear away the rubble. And the way you do that is through grief. You won't be able to see clearly unless you do.
When you were talking, Tori, it made me think of a recent experience that I had with some little T trauma. And it seemed silly in the moment because I'm like, this is years and years later, right? So I'm working with some horses right now, volunteering and everything. And I was working with one of the horses that is more bitey and didn't even think about it until she turned to me and acted like she was going to bite me. And I had a full-on meltdown. And I'm like, what in the world? And I was terrified that I was not going to be able to keep my students safe. And so there was that belief that I'm going to be so out of sorts that I can't keep my students safe. So then it made me feel even more emotion, right? But then as the director and I were talking to try and sort through what was going on, I was like, well, when I was a kid, I was bitten by some horses on my cousin's ranch, right? So as soon as she came at me like that, I'm just like, oh my gosh, she's gonna bite me. I know what that feels like. My body went into like full on protect. And when I did that and I reacted to her, then she got even more out of sorts. And so then we were like really having a hard time regulating, all because of what just happened in my body that happened when I was 10 years old. And I hadn't thought of that forever.
Mm.
And all
Well,
of a
and
sudden, it was just right there.
I'm so curious, would you at 8 years old have attached it then also to the belief of it's going to be my fault if someone else gets hurt by this thing that I love?
Oh, heck yeah, because I went out to the barn with my younger siblings, and I was the mama at that point. And so, absolutely. And then in my story, there's this times that if I failed in that way, protecting my siblings, then I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be cut off of a relationship and all of those kinds of things. And that was playing out even in me putting pressure on myself in this scenario right now, today, like a month ago. So
this is such a good reminder that grief is never a one and done. Like if you're a woman walking into a wilderness season, you are still going to live in a human body that bears your story when you step back into kingdoms.
Yep.
You know, there's been a lot of life that's happened from your moment in your childhood when you were bitten by a horse to now, this last couple weeks, being bit by a horse, right? To where every time your willingness to grieve in a longer process, a longer term season, sets you up for a quick response of compassion and understanding when you're triggered again. Because all of a trigger this is Carrie Garcia's like kind of layman's term response, is when a moment or an experience presses up against a familiar pain or grief and sorrow in your past story that still needs some care. And likely you'll never respond to the response of a horse biting you with full, complete calm and safety inside of your body. But now, decades later from when you were 8, you have the tools to be able to go, ooh, that message that it's going to be my fault if other people suffer. And if they do, and if I get it wrong, then I'm going to be kicked out and rejected. Holds probably so many thematic stories for you in your life, right? And so to press up against it in a quick little moment with a horse is the invitation back into the safety of God that says, my body is naming for me a place of sorrow and terror and panic that doesn't just live with horses, but lives in the corners of every story. And so I'm going to pause and go, I understand why I responded this way. I don't actually have to have contempt for the fear that I'm experiencing or the weakness that I'm experiencing, but it's the invitation back to unity and the abiding love of God that settles and comforts us. You know, that verse in Isaiah where it says, you are kept in perfect peace when your mind is stayed, with your heart stayed on me. Because you love me, because I love you, you know, God's love for us stays us. And I mean, that's one of those cliche verses, but that word shalom, like, is more than just peace. Like, oh, I'm calm. It's I'm integrated, heart, soul, mind, and body into the abiding love of God. And so when we find ourselves, experiencing another fracture, we're grafted back in, and there's a settledness and an understanding. And with every moment we press up against these invitations to grieve and we accept it, we grow our capacity for love. We grow our capacity for compassion. We grow our capacity for resilience and courage. And it allows us to continue walking out whatever journey God lays before us with that shalom, that peace of God still intact and not up for grabs.
Yeah. For sure.
I saw on your Instagram stories once, and by the way, friends, if you are not yet following Tori, we're going to put her in our show notes of how you can link directly to her Instagram. But you did this little reel that you had this line in there, and you were talking about, in the context of grieving, your story of the things that can happen, of the beauty that can be found there. You said healing is about learning to receive love from God that tears through our illusions to invite revelation. And I was like, okay, this whole place of grieving being the place that we can have revelation that we can have love from God. Would you say more here, Tori, to just kind of connect this to the heart of the listener who is maybe skeptical about leaning into the process of grief, of what they actually stand to gain or what could be revealed to them?
Yeah. Oh, this is like such a big question. However, let's try to simplify it. God's love is always held in tandem with his truth. You cannot experience the love of God without also encountering the truth that he brings. And the truth that he brings disillusionment. Like if you're living in an illusion, oh, my parents did the absolute best that they possibly could. I'm like, they're all broken and sinful people. So that's an illusion. That's not true. Oh, everything is fine and good. The terror of the illusion for me doing my burpees in the living room that day is I have to remain strong and powerful and in control in order to be loved by God and people. And so if I am to receive the love of God, it tears that illusion, tears that belief. It brings me into a season of disillusionment where then now I'm sitting on the couch like, wait, where do I find ground? Where do I go? You know, it's daunting, guys. If you're going to engage your story and choose to grieve, of course you're not going to want to feel what comes with that. But you know what else? You're already sad. I was already sad. I was already navigating a lot of disconnection and spiritual dryness and burnout physically and emotionally. I was already experiencing those things. I was just trying not to feel it. People go, how do I even grieve? Like, what do you do? Like, where do you start? What do I do with my hands? Do I look in the mirror and just think some really sad thoughts? And then I'm just like, gonna cry, you know?
And do I bring Kleenex?
You know what? Well,
are you supposed to, or are you not supposed to?
I'm not really sure. Can I sign up for a grief class and a grief group and then like be done with it once it's done? You know, I'm like, oh, you already know how to grieve. You've done it from the time that you were born. You come out the womb. My little niece, who I love, by the way, she's just this scrumptious little whirlwind, fell when I was watching her the other day. And what's her first impulse? She's like, I'm hurt and I'm crying and I need a hug. And she comes running to me, you know. But for me in the living room that day, it's I'm hurt and I'm crying and I'm not going to be going to the love of the Father with my arms wide open. Instead, I'm going to be going to my burpees in the backyard or the side of the couch. I can't be embraced on the couch because it feels too unsafe. It would invite too much threat. So the challenge in this is you have to choose to stop trying to avoid grieving. You already know how, and you know what you have to do in order to engage it. You tell the truth. You tell the truth. And in telling the truth that tears through those illusions, the love of God meets you with an answer that you don't have to work for, that you don't have to prove anything for, that you don't have to earn. You just receive it. And the reason why it's so hard and why it's so clunky is because that's not the way that love works with any human being on this planet. There's nobody that has offered you that kind of perfect, no strings attached, grace-filled, merciful, eternal love. It only exists in the love of God. And as believers, we get to be formed into the image of this love more and more. And the more that we grieve, and the more that we're honest, and the more that we receive from him, the more we become like him. And then when we become like him, we invite others into this encounter with love and with truth. Truth by itself is cruel. Truth by itself sometimes can just be like terrible. And then love by itself, at least from the world standards, can be really enabling and really dismissive, and it can lack so many boundaries. But truth and love, hand in hand, together, is what we all desperately long for and need, and it's where we're met when we encounter the presence of God. And it invites us into not just freedom, but peace. Peace with God, peace with ourselves, peace with others, and wholeness, heart, soul, mind, and body.
100%.
Yeah.
I fully agree with that.
Well, Tori, as we bring this to a close, and I would love for the 4 hours that you said it would take to go into more, we will have to have you back someday. Although you're about to have a baby. So,
Woo!
so
Very exciting.
very exciting. But as you imagine, when we here at Wild Hope Rising, we always try to help people in that wilderness space, right? To access or bring in this wide open, spacious life. This is the language that we use. So if you were to imagine for a woman who was in the wilderness right now, if she were to step back out of all that holds her back and into the wide open, spacious life that she was created for, what would that look like? Could you possibly paint a picture for us and what it might feel like to be that wildly free?
I think the picture that I'm having right now is connected to the phrase of how free do you want to be? Because you have the opportunity to turn back and to try to force yourself back into what your life looked like before. The problem is you won't be able to unsee what you see now. It's kind of like the red pill, blue pill, right? Which one do you want? Do you want the truth? Or do you want to stay in the illusion? And for the courageous woman, and this is our right as women, it's our God-given right to leave what is no longer for us and to choose the rite of passage of exile into the wilderness, just like Hagar did. In doing so, we set ourselves with a blank page before us and to go, your every step of your way forward through the wilderness, you're going to want to go back. But how free do you want to be? You don't know what's going to be coming ahead of you. But what if it's great? What if it's wonderful? What if it's good? I sat on the precipice of another layer of desert season in 2021 with a friend that asked me these words. She said, Tori, I wonder how much joy you could access if you didn't live under the pressure of so much responsibility. And her words sunk in me like a possibility of hope, but like I could not access it yet. Like, I don't even know what it means to live like that. And this is Tanya Godsee's words, the author of Befriending God. She said, you have the decision. Will you remain committed to your plans and your role of taking on so much responsibility, or would you be open to the possibility of being surprised by God? And I was like, my soul was like desperate to say yes. And then my bank account and my schedule and all of my responsibilities were like, you can't. But I pivoted one step at a time and going, I say yes to that. I say yes to being surprised by God. I say yes to the wisdom of knowing what it means to like walk that out with wisdom. And you know what? I'm 6 weeks away from giving birth to a new little human that is one of the many gifts
by God.
of surprise that God has given to me in the aftermath of saying, yeah, I want to stay open to the possibility of being surprised by you. Yes, I want to stay open to the opportunity of receiving goodness from you that I don't expect. I want to believe that the surprises are good and not for my detriment. And day by day, moment by moment, here I am ready to like give birth to this new baby and birth to a life that would have never existed had I not sat on that couch and decided in the terrain and the open space of my life in the desert, could I have the audacity to believe that God has goodness prepared for me ahead and not behind? So.
So good. Well,
Such wisdom.
yeah. Well, Tori, we want to thank you so much for your time with our Wild Hope Rising ladies. And friends, we would encourage you, if you want to stay in touch with Tori, and you do, she is a great follow on social media. God uses her life. We have got all of her information in our show notes, so you can click directly into it. You can also find out about the work that she does through Freedom Movement and connect to more of this work. So, Tori, again, thank you for being with us. We love you dearly, and it's been a blessing to have you today.
Yes.
Love you guys so much. Thank you.
My prayer is freedom will become your story and redemption your song. Now it's time to take hope-filled action. And if today's episode spoke to you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like, subscribe, and share, and help us grow this community. Thanks for listening to Wild Hope Rising. Until next time, keep stepping boldly into the spacious life you were created for.